Hi, this is Mathieu Drouin. I run an independent music company in Montreal called Equator with my partner, and we're sitting here in our house in Montreal.
Hi, I'm Francoise. As Matt said, we run a company called Equator, and we're sitting at home.
Equator is sort of a work in progress. It is a number of things. I mean, at the base of it, it's an artist management company, a record label, and a music publishing company, set up as three separate divisions. We have distribution in Canada and the US and are working out our international distribution right now. It's a brand new company, but conceptually, it's more of an independent record company that we tend to think the future of the music business is centered more around being partners with artists in all aspects of their careers, as opposed to just being the record company or just being the publisher or just being an artist manager. But that being said, you can't do that by accumulating the typical way of doing things in the industry, because it's wrought with conflict of interest and double dipping, and you just can't say I'm the publisher, the manager, and the record company. You sort of need to reinvent the wheel. So exactly what it's going to end up being, I don't know. We don't know exactly. But at the base of it, that's what it is: a record company, a management company, and a publishing company. From a structural standpoint, but conceptually a company and a business that aims to partner with artists in all aspects of their careers and work towards long-term career development.
Big family.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Well, there's different ways to address it, and I mean, I don't pretend for a minute that we've figured out the answer. Yeah. One example is this artist called the Lovely Feathers that we deal with. There's actually two artists right now that we work with in all aspects of their careers. So to give you an example, the Lovely Feathers have signed a publishing contract, a recording contract, and a management contract. But there are two main problems associated with the way companies in the past have tried to do all-in 360-degree deals. Number one is that, like I said, they've taken a traditional industry record contract where the record label can be making profits on an artist well before the artist is recouped, as you refer to it in the industry, which means the financial interests of the artist and the company, or at least the record company component, aren't aligned. So that creates a real problem when the manager, who's supposed to be representing the best interests of the artist, is interfacing with the label, who say happens to be himself, if you're partnered with the artist in all aspects of their career. When the financial interests aren't aligned, when you look at a given situation that you need to come to a conclusion on, or a consensus how you're going to adapt to it, if the interests aren't aligned, it doesn't work. So all our contracts are net profit splits with the artist. So there's no saying 50% of videos are recoupable, 100% of tour support, this kind of recording cost but not that kind, and travel. It's all cost to the project or cost to the project, and all revenues to the project are revenues to the project, and the profits get split with the artist. So in that sense, you align the financial interests. And really, conceptually, if you're looking at it, it's more, imagine, the way it works practically is, imagine you're an artist and we're a company with resources and experience and whatever. We'll sit down and we'll say, imagine it's like we're starting a company together where you own the bulk of it, but we own a piece of it, and you're providing the art and the talent and the willingness to promote it, and we're providing financial resources, infrastructure, and industry experience, and the knowledge and know-how to go out and promote it. And that's the partnership, basically. So it's like owning a company together, and as the people who are running the company on a day-to-day basis, we're effectively performing management services. So we don't own, in the context of this company, the way we've structured it so far, any part of the artist's merchandise or touring business. So on that level, coordinating their overall career, we will take a management commission, standard industry percentages, on merchandise and touring. But we won't take a commission on any share of the artist's proceeds from publishing or recording, because that would constitute a double dip. Essentially where you're participating on two levels, and when you combine that with the fact that it's a net profit split, whether it's 50-50 or 75-25 in the artist's favor or otherwise, you've aligned the earning interests. So for the most part, so far anyway, we've completely dealt with any conflict problems. That's a difficult question to answer, because let me start with an analogy. I mean, I think the future of the music business is not going to be about, in 5, 10, 15 years, about physical product necessarily, not nearly as much as it is today. And I think that that's going to lower the barriers of entry coming into the industry. It's going to mitigate, the stronghold that the major labels have on the industry at the moment. The whole technological landscape is changing, and that's changing things. I'm getting off on a tangent. I'm not going to go that far. All to say, though, that basically in today's world, 90% of the money that you're going to make, you're still going to make as a record label from the sale of physical product in stores. So you can't ignore that revenue center and say, I'm just going to be a digital label. But at the same time, you have to recognize, or at least it's my and our feeling, that it's not a question of a physical product model in decline that's going to like morph into something else. Over time, and probably a long period of time, the sale of physical product as representing 90% of the sales in the industry of recorded music is going to decline, and digital music and online sales are going to start to become more and more important, whether it's mobile, electronic transmission, let's say. So with that in mind, you have to recognize the current reality of the situation and respect that and work within that framework with the view to ultimately setting the stage for the future. So from a deal standpoint, it's the same thing. I'm not going to, for example, there's another artist we work with called Islands. They were formerly the Unicorns. I think you may have interviewed them in the context of this project. Well, those guys sold 60,000 records of the Unicorns in a short period of time with no support. They're one of the first bands out of Montreal. They broke up, actually, because one of the members didn't want to be famous and they were starting to get too famous. But when these guys put another record together and they financed it themselves and they came to us and they said, we'd really like you to put this out, but we want to license the record to you. And although right now we're talking about management and doing a lot of management work at the very least in the context of our relationship, they're not interested in a publisher. They want to own their own copyright. They already own the master. They paid for it, and they could license the project for way more money than they licensed it to us for, to a number of separate parties. So we're not going to say we're not willing to do a deal if it's if it's a deal with an artist that can help build a label and will attract other talent, and financially we can make money on that type of a deal. We're not going to turn it down just because it's not an all-in model. But at the same time, that's definitely what we believe to be the future, or at least a future that we're going to try and build something around. And so our opening, if we're dealing with an artist that has no history, that's brand new, that's starting fresh, that's definitely the approach that we're going to take. And we're going to be more inflexible with the concept of that being our business model. Not to say that it's the business model or that everybody has to do it, or it's the best one, or it's the right one, but it's the one that we're trying to build something around. So an artist, respect if they don't want to deal with that, or that's not the model they want to try, they don't believe in it. But if we're dealing with a brand new artist, that's what we're going for the most part, if we're going to be building it from scratch. But that doesn't preclude us from doing just a publishing deal or just a management deal. Metric is an artist we co-manage with another guy called Chris Taylor. That's just a management deal. Although they're signed to a record company that, as the president of DKD, Chris Taylor, who's a lawyer from Toronto, and I started Last Gang Records as a joint venture between his management company and DKD. And Metric is signed to them. They have a publishing deal with Chrysalis, and our deal is only a management deal. With the Lovely Feathers, it's recording management and publishing. With Islands, it's just records. So we can't afford to make it cut and dry, and it's all a work in progress.
We do everything.
Well, Fuzz and
it's not cut and dry because there's not enough people to actually compartmentalize everything and have everyone do one thing, one specific thing. So we do everything from mailing out the promotional records to making the deals.
But, infrastructure-wise, we have direct board approval at Factor, which is the foundation to assist Canadian talent on record, which is guaranteed financing for up to 4 unreleased projects at any time. From a financial resource standpoint, that's huge. It's the ability to generate up to $1 million a year in grants and loans guaranteed if you ask and your project qualifies, and the potential to generate more. We have distribution through EMI in Canada, which is one of the 4 major labels. We have distribution through Caroline, which is a division of EMI in the US that we picked because we're dealing mostly with independent artists in the context of Equator, and it made more sense to go through a label like that who understands the projects and can do organic development than to go through EMI proper, which was a choice that we had. Fuzz and I work in the project full time. We have Mark and another girl called Samantha Lee who are working with us. We have a bookkeeper who comes to the office 2 days a week and works from home the rest of the time. And then we have my brother, who's a retired investment banker, who helps us to structure a lot of things from a financial standpoint, because we're also setting up, I mean, we have worldwide deals with iTunes. We deal with an aggregator who takes care of all of the other online distribution channels for us. So we've subcontracted out a lot of the work, which also makes sense for us from a financial standpoint, because just because of the way the grant system works in Canada, if we hire somebody to do publicity or to do radio promotion in-house, then we cannot raise funds to help cover those costs. But if they're a third-party contractor, then we can. And we can basically take their bill and submit it to the grant agencies and get a portion of that paid back. Again, when you're a Canadian-owned company with a history of success dealing with Canadian artists, it's not like anybody can come in and set that up, but for our particular situation, that makes sense. I mean, we looked at 3 publicity companies for islands in the U.S. Biz3, Big Hassle, and Tag Team. Big Hassle and Biz3 are both in New York. Big Hassle and Tag Team are both in New York. Biz3 is in Chicago, which isn't necessarily the most centrally located place. I didn't really know the company. They dealt with Death From Above, which is an artist that we worked with, putting them out on Last Gang, which was that label we talked to you about before. And other than that, didn't really know much about them. But they were gung-ho. We sent the music to all 3 of them. They were all very interested, but this, Catherine Fraser, who runs this company, was calling us twice a week and was saying, I love the project, here's what I would do, here's a 13-page press plan of who I'm going to go after. And so it allows us to really take on the big motivated people to work on the project, which I think serves the projects well. We're also right now talking with a number of different parties to provide infrastructure support if we needed it. It's actually, ironically, once we announced our resignation from DKD, which is the Donald K. Donald Group, it's one of Canada's largest independent music companies, 9 record labels, a studio, publicity company, radio promotion, 3 event businesses working with concerts, government events, and corporate events. It's the Canadian Music Network, Canadian Entertainment Network, which are the industry trade resources or trade magazines. The company has pretty much a complete scope of everything in terms of its vertical integration in the independent music industry in Canada. And when we decided we were going to, set that aside, which is obviously, a big decision, to forego a pretty big salary and a prestigious quote-unquote industry position that comes with leverage and clout to, buy a house and forego any form of salary and sink all your money into the always safe investment that is an independent music company, I thought people were going to think we were crazy. Yeah. And some people did.
Some did.
But a lot of people came out of the woodwork with interest in investing in the company. We have a little bit of money from what we did before and from a past life, and we're financing this ourselves. Things are going really well. The government funding helps. The support and belief of our distributors, who've given us relatively significant advances, is allowing us to build this completely in our own image for the moment and finance it ourselves. And we can handle all the infrastructure needs that we have for the moment. We have like 4 artists that we're working with, maybe another. And our plate is full with that, but completely manageable. And when it gets to the point where we need to have more infrastructure and more support, we have a variety of options that we can look at right now to determine who's the best partner. And I mean, we'll either eventually ultimately build that infrastructure out ourselves or partner with somebody who can offer it, at least in the short or medium term.
We're also really lucky that we are able to do it at this point just on our own, because we can give Equator and this whole thing like really what we've always wanted it to be and make it what we kind of always dreamed it to be without anyone else's money. And it's ours right now, and whoever's going to come on as a partner after will have set up that vision, and that'll be there and it'll be established, and that person is going to be in agreement with that vision and is going to want to take part in it. Therefore, I just find it's more cohesive, it's more, it keeps the kind of dream real.
I mean, it allows us to build it with the integrity, not integrity from a morality standpoint, but the integrity to the vision that we have without the benefit of outside input. You bring on somebody who's going to give you $1 million or $5 million, he's going to want to say. Yeah. Right now, we don't want somebody else to have a say. Even at DKD, where I really did have free reign to do whatever I want. The fact of the matter is, there's a 30-year history and a culture within the business There's 70 employees across the country, plus or minus roughly across all the different divisions. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So right now we want to build it up in our own image of what we want to build until at least it's working. And we've proven that this is a model that can work. And at that point, we'll consider bringing on other people.
I always say family because I think that's the word that kind of resumes the human side of it, to maintain that contact, even though it starts out really small and hopefully it'll be really big one day. But I think that what's going to set us apart is having that relationship with the artist, respecting really partnering with the artist, the basis of the business model, which is partnering with the artist, but also having that across the board. Relationships you develop their talent, you're part of their career, you're part of their lives, they're part of yours. Like, it's kind of a give and take, and I think that it's maybe utopian to think that this will keep going, and even when it's super big, but I think that was one of the most driving forces behind everything, because being in a company where he did have control on what was getting signed, this, that, and the next thing, but with the 30 years of history that was behind us at that point, there's always stuff that comes out.
That's the key point. When we grow it, it's not, you can't maintain an independent, I mean, we're running this right now out of our house. We have, on the second and third floor, we have 7 workstations in total. We bring the artists into the house. It's like, we like that vibe. And make no bones about how ambitious we are to build this into an international, music company, and one day a media company. We both have very lofty ambitions. And obviously, once you get to a certain size, you're not going to maintain that same feel. But if it's built on a certain set of,
values,
principles, at least you instill that culture and then set it up in such a way that it can grow based on that foundation into something that's going to be more of a corporate structure, more of a formal organization. It has to be, and that's the trade-off when you grow. Equator, is there a musical style? Equator is definitely, like Fuzz said, more centered around the indie side of things, and by indie, which is, definitely an oversaturated word, like Fuzz said. Artists that we like, first of all, but that we feel are making a valid artistic contribution, but that don't necessarily fit within the frameworks of the traditional industry channels. So an artist has a great song that's not necessarily radio friendly, or not to any format that currently exists, or that's not an MTV type artist. That's what I mean by indie, or that's what I think we mean by indie. Artists that we really like and we think there's an audience for, and an audience that is ripe and is willing to purchase this kind of stuff, but that hasn't been exposed to it,
out how to get to those people,
and that they can't be exposed to this music through regular media channels. That's the type of artist that we're focused on. If you were to draw like a graph, right, and draw a curve like this, and this was the music market. That's obviously not a very good illustration, but this, but between here and the curve, that's the music market. If you were to draw a line like that, that top half is what the major labels focus on, and we're talking volume of business, let's say. The space in between that curve and the axis represents like dollar figures. If you draw that diagonal line and you take the top half, it's a very small percentage of artists that are generating the bulk of the revenue in the industry. And that's what the major labels focus on, because they want to get a couple of projects that they can put through their system. As soon as a major label says yes on a signing right now in the US, it's a minimum of $2 million. And they basically have a horrendous hit ratio in terms of what they sign that actually succeeds or sometimes even comes to market. But when it hits, they make so much money off it in terms of volume that it pays for all the other mistakes. Well, the profit margin of those types of artists, the return on investment, is relatively small by comparison to indie artists, for example. But the volume of sales that you can make is such that even if you're making only $1 a record, let's say when you sell 10 million records, that's $10 million. On an indie artist, you may be making $3 or $4 a record, but you put out a Death from Above record, and it's going to be really hard to sell more than a couple of 100,000 units, especially as an indie. So the return on investment is really significant in terms of percentage, but there's a ceiling on the volume, which makes it really less interesting for a major because of how they're set up. They prefer a few projects that are going to make millions and millions of sales than to trying to monetize a slew of little projects that could be more profitable on a project by project basis, but you'd have to do thousands of them to get up to the same sort of level of revenues that you can achieve when focusing on the Nickelbacks and Sum 41s and Avril Lavignes of the world. That made a lot of sense in the old world, but right now if you talk to Google, for example, they'll tell you it's all about the long tail. The fact of the matter is, the niche market artists that are way more profitable on a return on investment standpoint are actually just as big a market in terms of potential dollar sales as the rest, except there were no channels through which to expose that music to these people effectively to actually monetize a niche. But a niche on a worldwide level can be huge. And as the online environment continues to develop for music and the ability to make records inexpensively, to distribute them around the world and make them available, including through, major storefronts like iTunes, online without having to go through a physical distributor, and without having, even if you have a physical distributor, the problem of getting into retail. Because if you look at an HMV lately, or go to a Tower Records, look today, how much of that space in that store, which hasn't grown in the last 10 years, is now devoted to DVDs. The real estate, the square footage for every store available for music is shrinking consistently. These music stores are turning into entertainment software retailers. They're already selling DVDs. They're talking about selling video games. And they want to diversify out of just music because sales are declining and the profit margins are slimming. So where you really needed a major label before, or a major distributor, today it's even more difficult to get into the stores without them. Which makes the plight of these niche artists or the independent artists that aren't moving a lot of product really, really grim in a physical bricks and mortar world. But online, that goes away. You can make records less expensively. You can distribute them, not just make them available, but actually make them available through a destination, an online destination like iTunes, instantaneously with no problems. You can market them virally in really inexpensive ways. And on that level, potentially these niche markets in the long tail is a huge future market. And so we do want to focus on those types of artists as well. And then Equator also, probably in the context of if we did this Can West thing, let's say, we'd bring on a lot of independent artists, for example, would love to be on a major label or have the clout that a major label brings to the table without having to deal with the culture or the association per se. So one of the things that we want to try and build underneath this Equator personality is an infrastructure that brings to the table a lot of the advantages that a major label used to or would have in a past context. So if we do through Equator a joint venture with Can West, let's say, which will have an outside partner and will be run separately and will have an objective of more commercial mainstream music, that doesn't have any negative effect on the culture that we're building for Equator or the mentality or the personality of the company, but it does create a situation where on some level we can still use the benefit of that network of media properties or the infrastructure of a major label distributor that we have for Equator, etc., in order to break these artists. What we're looking for in terms of partners at the outset is not a dollar amount, partially because at least for the moment we can get by without it. And we'd prefer to, strictly from a maintaining the upside standpoint and from the point of view of not having to deal with outside input in the preliminary stages of the company. Most importantly, we want what's called smart money. In other words, we do recognize that we're going to need to bring in capital to grow the business, which can either come from sales success, or it can come from an investment, or it can come from a variety of places. But we're definitely going to need capital at some point. But most importantly, it's that the person or the entity that bring that capital to the table either have no participation at all in the company, or if they do, that they be smart money. In other words, people who not only are bringing money to the table, but other collateral benefits or assets or opportunities. But most importantly, somebody who will respect the integrity of what it is we'll try to do, and who
drives with us personally.
Yeah, exactly. Who gets it.
And
also somebody who's going to have to accept the fact that we won't surrender control of the company. One of the things we want to do is once we bring on either let's say we're working with a more commercial mainstream artist. I say hypothetically, even though that's not our focus right now at all. I bring it up because it's more likely that this type of situation would come about in that type of context. So we sign an artist, and all of a sudden Sony comes to the table and say, we want to sign the artist. We'll give you $500,000 as an advance to record the record, and we'll $500,000 marketing commitment and tour support and blah blah blah. Say, okay, we're gonna take that deal, and we're going to keep the Canadian rights and put it out ourselves, keep our separate royalty pool for the artist, which is cool, but we really realize that all things being equal, with 90% of CD sales still happening in stores, and the fact that major labels have the clout at retail, blah, 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 it's in the best interest of the artist that we make this deal. So we're going to make the deal. Well, at that point, once we've made a major label deal, you can afford, especially one with good terms, you can go out to an established manager who knows he's going to be able to make money simply because even if the project fails, the way the major labels invest in a project, whether it's through tour support, putting them on the road, paying to some degree for radio airplay, which is going to generate performance and royalties and publishing income, you know that you can make money as a manager. So once you have a major label deal on board, what we want to do a lot of the times, if the artist wants it, and we provide contractually them the right to request this, is once we get things going, you can request that we, the company, bring out outside third-party co-management. And that's an objective third-party co-manager who will be not consistent through every artist that we work with, whose agenda, first of all, he will get paid. Why I say the artist would have to want this, because right now, economically speaking, this proposal that we provide in terms of the deal structure is very beneficial to an artist, especially in the case of success. 50% of the profits on a record, on a successful record, amounts to way more money than even a 20% per unit royalty with the deductions in a typical industry contract. So not only in a successful project are they making a bigger share of the profits, they have no manager taking 20% of that. If we bring in an outside third-party manager, they're going to want to commission the revenue centers of publishing and recording income that we don't. So there's a cost component for the artist, but what it provides them with and what it provides us with is a system of checks and balances where, this situation is unavoidable in any context, but at the very least, we'll bring on an independent co-manager. It'll cost you a little bit more because you'll have to give him, if it's 20% and we're co-managing, industry standard is 20%, you're going to have to give him a 10% commission, let's say, on your recording and publishing income.
You would split that with them?
No, I would say we'll split the work with an independent manager, and we'll have to split the work. They'll have to do the work, but they will take half of our commission on touring and half of our commission on merchandising, and they'll want to take a commission on publishing and recordings because they have no participation in it, but they'll take a half commission. So if the commission industry standard is 20, they'll take 10. And we won't take a commission because we're involved with the artist on that level. So that provides them with an independent sort of system of checks and balances where they have somebody who's only going to fight for their interests within the framework of the opportunities that come into the company. Fuzz and I have been together for 9 years, and we're 26 years old.
Cat's out of the
since we were like 17. And when we first started going out, I was starting a technology, it was just an idea that because the IT bubble and everything was going on actually took off, and we made some money at it because the company actually made money in a world where people were buying up things that weren't making money just based on the dream. And anyway, Canlon was a bit, which it never even ended up getting publicly called, but that's what we called it originally. It was a business-to-business travel services company that acted as an intermediary between big corporations and corporate travel agencies and independent chauffeured limousine services around the world. Where if you go to London, for example, the cost of a black cab on a Monday to Friday from Heathrow to London's financial district could be £50. At the time, that was $250 Canadian. Black cabs are cool. Whole advertising campaigns on tourism for London and England are based around them. But they're not really that comfortable. A lot of them don't have windows that open, the old ones. You certainly can't work on your laptop or get a wireless connection. Nobody picks you up at the gate and carries your luggage, and you don't have a nice Lincoln Town Car or whatever. These services are available for a fraction of the price, for example, at Heathrow, which is where it all started. But because these cab companies are controlled by the state, they're preferentially placed. So they're like 85% of the people who came out of the airport, business travelers, wanting to go downtown London from Heathrow, if they didn't have prearranged transportation, they get in a black cab. So there's a service available for a fraction of the price that's way higher class, way more luxurious, and way more apropos for a business traveler in the sense that we provided access to wireless GSM technology so they could work online in the 45 minutes that it would take them to get there in rush hour traffic, whatever. A far more enhanced service for a fraction of the price of what these other black cabs were for or were charging, but none of the people knew about it. So we just solved the problem by saying we'll enlist travel agencies who will offer the value-added service at a reduced price to their customers at the moment they buy their ticket to fly from wherever they're flying into London, and we'll negotiate a volume discount with the service providers, the guys that own the cab companies, increase their price a little bit, make money on the differential, give the travel agent a kickback for bringing us the service, and then boom, it's streamlined and it's completely virtual and it doesn't really exist. There's no infrastructure costs. And that sort of took off. And then for various reasons, we got out of that and made a little bit of money. 2 years later, when we were 19 years old, I took the better part of the next year and I sailed around the world because I knew I wanted to be in business, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be passionate about it. And I wasn't passionate about that. And I figured, okay, this is great. I've proven to myself that I can do it. It works. I've got a little bit of flexibility right now to figure out what it is I want to do. And at this point, having had the success we had early, nobody's fault but our own if we're not happy with the way things turn out. So make sure to write the right choice. And I went and sailed for a year and then came back, studied finance and marketing, hated it, dropped out, and happened to see Richard Branson on a TV screen after he'd crashed his hot air balloon in the middle of the North Atlantic. I don't know if it was live or not, but giving an interview on CNN. And I'd read his biography when I was sailing, and I just thought at that moment, why not the music business? That's fun. This is a guy who made a couple of $1 billion working in music. Everything he's ever done, he calls himself an adventure capitalist. Everything he's ever done is start an airline, a cell phone company, music company. He made movies. Everything he did for fun. He holds more world records than most people alive on Earth right now, on a whole bunch of levels. Like he's a huge, stunt or adventure seeker. And one of the things that he really and witnessed, us operating at first out of our house. He was being interviewed, and the woman said, "How do you have so much time for fun? In addition to a company with your $5 billion, 250 companies, over 100,000 employees. How do you work so hard, run that big of a company? You're a renowned family man who spends 2 months a year on his private island with his family, and they never see him work. And yet you also have more like world records to your name than most people on Earth that do that for a living, try to break records. How do you do that? I mean, how do you have so much time for work, still take care of your family, and have time left over for play?" And this is what really clinched it for me. He said, "Well, that's your problem." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you look at it as work on the one hand, family after, and fun if you have time left. I don't see it that way. I just get up every morning and I live my life, and it's all the same thing, and it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And my adventures trying to fly a hot air balloon around the world, that generates publicity for my airline because I structure it that way, and I just think that way." And I thought, you know what, that's beautiful. So music business it is. I didn't know anything about the music business though, so figured I got to gain some experience. Don't want to work for a major label because they'll pigeonhole you. And Donald K. Donald was the biggest independent music company in Canada, so I went and I sat in their reception for 2 days till Donald agreed to see me, and he gave me a job as an unpaid intern, and that was in April.
Although he thought you wanted a record deal at first.
Yeah, he's like, "What have you been in my lobby for 2 days? You want a record deal? You're in a rock band?" I'm like, "No, I want a job." And he goes, "Oh, well, we're not hiring." I said, "I'll work for free." He goes, "Okay, you start Monday." And that was in April 2000, and just worked my way up from there to become the president of the English division on the record side first, and then the whole company. And
how do you do that? How do you go from being...
Well, that's really hard.
It's a long, involved story that started off with saving them $30,000 a year on their cell phone bills because I was an unpaid intern in the accounting department and realized that they were just paying through the nose and had phone lines that were not active anymore from old employees. And
from like the 80s.
Some plans were on like 20-year-old plans that they lost the phone, never disconnected the line, kept paying it every month, and it was like on the days when a cell phone plan cost you $500 a month for the basic plan. I mean, I found one cell phone in the office that looked like a car battery with an old school Desert Storm phone attached to it. And this is what Donald used to use to run festivals, and he used to carry that around instead of a walkie-talkie. This was his cell phone. Mm-hmm. He always loved gadgets. Anyway, I got noticed with the cell phone thing, then took them from like $300,000 in grants in 1 year when I started doing grants and loans as an extension of the accounting department to over $2 million. And then he started to really pay attention. And then this guy who was running the whole thing, the president for Donald, quit and left to go start his own company. He fell in love with an artist that he was working with and decided to leave the company. And I'm not going to go into more detail than that. But at that point, he needed someone to run the English division, someone to run the French division. And I had brought him Simple Plan, and he had not wanted to pay the $30,000 for it. And I had worked with Sum 41 along with this other guy, Parkside Renault, really early on in the company, knew they were going to blow up, and not that many people supported them in the company, but then they blew up. And I also brought him Jack Johnson, which we had the rights, I had negotiated the rights to for $15,000 from a guy called JP Pugny, who was Ben Harper's manager, and they just created this record company. And I had met him in Colorado once again, ironically, and we were skiing. And he told me that he was Ben Harper's manager. And I told him I love this other artist. I think Ben Harper played on the record, Jack Johnson. He said, yeah, I actually own the record company, started it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'd love to put that record out. I work for this company. And we had the rights for $15,000, and Donald didn't want to do it because there was no grant funding. And then Jack Johnson blew up and sold 200,000 copies. Yeah. So between the cell phones, increasing the grant income, which really made the difference in which were tough years between profit and loss for the whole company, and then having the three artists that I really believed in, one that we worked with sell over almost 1 million copies, and the other two that we didn't work with sell hundreds of thousands of copies, but he didn't want to pick them up because he didn't think they were worth what ended up being a very mediocre sum in retrospect. He offered me the presidency of the English company, and I took that. And then later on, the guy who took the French side couldn't cut it a year later, and he gave it to me. And then I became partners in the full company, and that's how that started. And then Fuzz, meanwhile, after I came back from sailing, well, you tell that side of the story. She went and studied at Boston at Emerson, and when she came back, well, why don't you tell your side of the story?
Yeah, not half as interesting as Matt's, but I studied in Boston. Basically, I applied, and when I got in, I figured I have to do it. I got in. What are the chances that a little kid from Montreal gets into this really tiny little school? So I left home. Matt had just come back from the ship, and I picked up everything, and I moved to Boston. I studied there for a year, and then at one point, I realized that it wasn't worth everything it was all, supposed to be. So I decided, you know what? Dad, I'm coming home. Dad was very happy to see me come home. And so I came back, and at that point, Matt was working at DKD. I went back, took a few classes at school, dabbled in a few law classes, and once I did that, I got a job at a company called eFundraising that is now a division of the Reader's Digest. It was a web-based company that made trinkets to raise funds, like scratch cards, chocolates, little stuff that, Boy Scouts are going to buy to go and raise money. And it's a company that was started by a guy that was a friend of my brother's. And so I went on board with that, and I said, okay, that's great. I was working in operations, very corporate, very wearing, jacket, suit, and all that. And I didn't like it, and I had older people reporting to me, which was kind of awkward because I was really young, and I didn't want to be in that position, and I didn't want that formality and all that. And at the same time, we were living together, and Matt was working, and he was working really late. And by the time he came home, he didn't want to go out. He didn't want to go see shows. He wanted nothing to do with anything that was, fun.
Basically, I had no life outside of work, and it came down to bringing the relationship into work, or picking the relationship. So we rolled the dice.
And it turned out that there was a girl that was working in the promotions department that left, and Donald gave me a call and said, would you want to do radio promotions? I've never done radio promotions. I'd never done anything of the sort. I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not comfortable at that. So I went in, and that's history. I started out as a radio tracker. I was Donald's assistant for a bit.
So yeah, essentially it got to the point where after I was at DKD and had come back from sailing, she was studying in Boston and had come home and hated what she was doing, first of all, and second of all, we weren't seeing each other at all, ever.
Sorry,
because I was working like a madman, and she was working, and we had different schedules. And we got to the point where it was sort of like, either it's work, it's a relationship, or we take a gamble and bring the relationship to work, which is what we did. And she started off also, not as an intern, but working as a low-level employee in the radio promotion publicity department, and worked her way up to running that as I came up in the company as well. And we were effectively running it for a little while, and we had some financial resources from the past, from that technology play, and had made some money, really good salaries and a percentage of the profits and a percentage of the company in the Donald K. Donald Group while we were there. And we got into a negotiation with Donald at one point, who had no kids, and he wanted to sell the company. He wanted us to take it over. And we couldn't ultimately come to a deal, not because he wasn't offering a great deal, but it's because conceptually I got to the point, and we talked about it, we realized where there was a lot of culture in this company. It was going to be really hard to change it into something that was in our own image. And, basically we just realized that we didn't want to live or come up through ultimately the shadow and the legacy of Donald K. Donald. We wanted to do things our own way and do it on our own. And that just led to the conclusion that we wanted to start our own thing, and it went from there. I mean, it morphed. It was going to be a joint venture with DKD at first, where we would really scale back our involvement in the day-to-day and focus on this new company. But then because of government funding restrictions and things like that, he couldn't be a shareholder. And ultimately, over a series of machinations, it just sort of ended up that we were doing this on our own.
I think the reason why both of us are probably willing to take those risks and willing to go out on our own and do it, one, we're very stubborn, I think, and we tend to micromanage everything, and we tend to also, if we're not doing it, we're not sure it's being done right. Although,
that's a weakness, not a strength, but
no, exactly,
one that's particularly prevalent with me.
So I think that, I don't know.
Personally, I think we had the benefit of, one, the ability to be entrepreneurial because we got lucky early, but also that turning into something that never did I really hope or aspire would ultimately. I mean, I've always dabbled in little projects and didn't know that this thing was going to take off or do, even marginally well to the point where it'd make any money at all, much less quite a bit of money. And so that gave me the confidence that, we'd done it before, we can do it again. But are you born with it? I don't know, but it's definitely, a trait that I developed early. I was always trying to sell something or make money somehow from the age of as early as I can remember, 5, 6 years old. She comes from 8 years of music and loving music, and whereas I came from, I'm not a musician. I had no knowledge of the music industry. I made the decision to get into it on a whim because I quit school, walked out in the middle of an exam, and then said, shit, what am I going to do? It was very impulsive. And Richard Branson happened to be on the television screen. And he was an entrepreneur. And that's what I was first, an entrepreneur who wanted to do something I was passionate about. And he seemed very passionate. And, he was espousing his life philosophy. And I thought, that sounds pretty cool. That's how I happened into it. And ironically, one of the reasons you ask where the know-how came from, but one of the contributing factors to me quitting school was I was frustrated by the process of having to learn at the rate of the lowest common denominator. And the teachers I found, didn't speak the language very well on a lot of levels, actually. And I wasn't learning I'm a guy who will learn on my own. I read books voraciously. And I wasn't learning, not only was I wouldn't say I wasn't learning, but the rate of learning had really slowed at school. And not only was I not learning as fast as I, felt I could go and learn on my own, but I wasn't learning exactly what I wanted to be learning. I had to learn according to the curriculum of the program as opposed to whatever I was interested in. And I had, like I said, the security to just go, screw it. And so I would say that most of the business know-how I developed through reading books, mostly biographies on other entrepreneurs, and through practical application. And the same is true of the music industry. I knew nothing when I got into it. And I tell artists all the time when I start to work with them, and that's why Fuzz and I are a really great team and complete each other well. I'm like left side of the brain for the most part. I know what I like in terms of music and what I think will actually work. In terms of marketability, whether it's commercial or whether it's independent. But I know where I know how all the deals work in the music industry. I know where the money comes from, where it goes, how it gets siphoned in one direction or the other. And I learned that from having the benefit, which was exactly the idea, of being in a very substantial independent company that had interest in all these businesses, but where I wouldn't get pigeonholed into being, just in the publicity department or just in the royalties department. So I just was given access to an open book, and Donald and I developed a really father-son type of relationship where I was granted unrestricted access to everything in the company. So I learned it by reading contracts and by negotiating contracts and by talking with the lawyers who we worked with. And it's all just practical experience, I would say. And then on the music side of things, well, that's way more Fuzz's strength, and she handles all the creative services stuff.
Also, the same thing when we find bands, it's kind of the same process as when we were saying, you find that one person you respect, their taste and all that. So I think that has a big part of it. You go to gigs a lot, you talk to a lot of people, you talk to the people that are there all the time, the sound guys at venues, you talk to the kids that are there, you get out there and you ask what's cool. You also there are certain people that I respect a lot, sound engineers that I really love and respect, and they're also going to say, did you check them out? You should check them out, and you hear stuff like that, and it's
being connected to that network of people who are living that scene.
Those people, and then once it's the same thing. Once you establish a relationship, you know that I could tell you, well, this guy is gonna often talk about bands that are more like this, and that's less my shtick. So when he talks about a band, and he goes, well, you know what, you may like it actually, and you go out and see them, and it's all.
More often, I think you get referred something from somebody that you trust or that you know than actually, happen to be surfing the internet and find something or see a listing, go to see a show with no knowledge of who the artist is.
Because then it's kind of in the dark. There are so many bands out there that if you start doing that,
again, it comes down to the filters, lost, right? We all have our filters.
And my filters are the people I talk to, and also kids. My parents, friends' children, they talk to you. Oh, this band, I saw them. They're a little band. Guy in my school plays in them, and it's all about
You listen to chatter. Not locally in Montreal, although a lot of talent is coming from Montreal. But in terms of, we're open to anything, and we're not working with any specific geographical location. But at the same time, especially getting the company off the ground, from a financial standpoint, you can get grants to develop Canadian artists that are really substantial, and they don't exist when you're developing a U.S. artist. So with a really rich talent pool, Canada produces, I think the UK just surpassed it, but for like 4 or 5 years, we were the number 2 producer of talent, musical talent in the world after the US with 1/10 the population. And you look at the number of Canadian artists succeeding on the international stage, from Arcade Fire and Wolf Parade through to Sarah McLachlan, Sum 41, Avril Lavigne, and then go further back, you got Corey Hart and Celine Dion and Shania Twain and Sass Jordan, and then all the way through to Nelly Furtado and the Bare Naked Ladies. There are tons of Canadian artists succeeding. So the talent pool is really rich. The artists are recognized and profitable, and there's so much grant money and so much government support to develop Canadian artists that in the starting stages we're focusing on Canadian. If we can't pick between 2 bands that we like equally, we'll go with a Canadian band because there's money to develop them. Factor is the foundation to assist Canadian talent on record. It is one of several grant organizations. It receives money from the federal government as well as from the broadcasters, both television but mostly radio broadcasters, who contribute money to the development of Canadian talent, not entirely out of the goodness of their heart, but largely as a criteria of their license with the CRTC, their broadcast license, or because in certain phases of consolidation to gain industry support, they agreed to, for X number of years, pay a percentage of their advertising revenue in a pool of money that would be redistributed to various cultural sectors, including the music industry. So basically you got money coming from 2 sources, the federal government and the broadcasters. And then on a provincial level, in Ontario, Quebec, and Vancouver mostly, there are some government subsidies on a provincial level. But let's say just it's government money and it's private money, poured into Factor in varying percentages that funds a variety of programs, from licensing and recording a record to marketing it, producing a video, going out on a tour, subscribing to Billboard, or paying for a website for the company to be built. They have a variety of programs that are critical to I think that one of the main reasons the Canadian industry is as successful as it is in terms of the success of Canadian artists on the independent stage is because a lot of these artists got to hone their skills and develop in an independent network with the support financially of these organizations that allowed them to continue to pursue their dream or their art for as long as it took for them to break, and also help them to develop the skills that they needed to do their job correctly.
Do you owe them money back?
Almost everything is a grant, with the exception of the licensing or album production financial contribution, which is a loan. But it is a conditional non-recourse loan. So you pay it back as a percentage of your revenues if you have success, and if you don't have success after 2 years, they let you wipe it off your books. Yeah, it's cool. But I mean, they don't hand that out. Like, you have to have, proven. You basically 20% of the money goes to just anybody who applies with a valid project through what's called the jury process. The rest of the money goes to 3 tiers of established companies, and you basically have to have proven that you can make money and survive on your own, that they're not just life supporting a deadwood company. You prove that you can succeed without it, and then they give you the money to further your success, if you know what I mean. And there's Factor. There's also Star Maker, which is for a little bit more established artists. You can't access that until you sold 10,000 copies. Factor's accessible out of the box, and then more money as you sell more projects. And I want to name them all because I think they all deserve the recognition. There's also Video Fact, Promo Fact, Bravo Fact, and Max Fact, which are 4 video or website related funding organizations funded mostly by like Much Music and Music Plus. Star Maker is funded by the radio broadcasters, and then there's Factor. Or on a French, provincial level in Quebec, there's also Musique Action, which is the French counterpart of Factor, because it's federal money and we're a bilingual company, so they finance both language artists.
Can I talk about if you're with, because I look at now we're what it takes to make it in this world, in the indie world.
We'll let you know when we make it.
Yeah, but basically I think that if I wasn't in this with Matt, it would be a lot harder, because it's something that you really have to, you give everything for the dream that you're about to develop, and we're working 18-hour days, and it's a good thing that we're side by side doing it, and it's a good thing that we're both in it and we both love it, because I try and picture if I was doing something else that was more of a 9 to 5, which it was at one point, which is why I came into this. It's hard because it's something that very few people get that passion and it's a 24/7 job when you're managing artists, it's getting a phone call in the middle of the night, lost my passport, we have a border crossing, what do I do, can you fax the papers over to the border? And it's stuff that, it's not rocket science, it's life, it's everyday life with an artist that has a life on the road, and it's something for someone who's not in it themselves really hard to understand. Like, you go to a birthday dinner for your grandmother, your cell phone needs to be on. It'll be on vibrate in your purse, but if you've got a band on the road, if you got a band in the studio, like, you need to be there. And it's really hard for people that aren't in it to get that. It's like, you should be able to turn it off. It's a job. Actually, no, it's more of a lifestyle. It's a choice we made, and it's something that you go into it, I think, saying this is our life, kind of the way Branson said life has to be fun. You wake up every day and you make it happen. I think that
some people say don't mix business with pleasure, but maybe it's a policy.
Yeah, with
but
us,
is that our approach, or is it that critical to success? I think it is. I think it is critical to success on one level in this, especially in the independent music business. You okay? I'm gonna, because we don't have a lot of time, and what is critical in no particular order, in my view, in terms of succeeding in the music business or in the independent music scene in particular, with the caveat that we've had some success before, but we're trying this now, and who knows if I'm actually right. I think, one, you can't be risk averse, and you can say that from the standpoint of somebody who has a little bit of money who's sinking it all into something that's a very uncertain investment, but you can also look at it from the point of view of, you can make a lot of money, and God knows I hope to make a lot of money, but you can't be going into it because you want to make money. Mm-hmm. Because it'll lead you to make, the fact of the matter is it's oxymoronic, but it's the music business. And those are very two counterintuitive notions. Doing what's best to further the cause of art, which to ultimately is necessary to make it successful and monetize it properly, is often very counterintuitive. And what is the best business decision with respect to making that art successful and profitable is often counterintuitive to what is, just strictly speaking, the best business decision to make, all things being equal in another circumstance. So don't be risk averse. Definitely understand all the aspects of the business. Otherwise you'll get screwed. Mm-hmm. Partially because the music industry is a dirty business on a lot of levels. And partially because there are people who are really great human beings in the music industry who maybe don't even know themselves how all the deals work. But the standard industry contracts in different, incarnations are easy to change in your favor, but they're structured by default in a commonly accepted way in not the most favorable manner. So if you don't understand where the dollar starts and where it goes and how it gets broken down and siphoned around, it's really hard to protect your downside. So don't be risk averse because it's a risky business, but definitely mitigate your risk by understanding not just, from a business side, where the money's coming from and how the deals work and how the money gets made and who's taking a piece along the way. And that's from the business side of things. And be willing, like Fuzz said, it's a way of life a lot of the time. How do you find artists? Through the network of people. There's a scene of people who sort of exist in this world, and I'm sure there are different scenes around the world, and especially with the internet, they're connected. But you have to, you can't sit on the sidelines. You have to watch. You can't just watch. You have to be a part of what's going on in order for the opportunities to flow to you. And then from an artistic standpoint, even though I say at the outset that's I'm maybe selling myself too short even, but I'm not the music guy or the artistic guy in it. Be honest. Be honest about what your strengths are and what you can bring to the table for an artist, what they can look to you for and what they can't. And a lot of people get into the music business because they want to, be associated with it. And the fact of the matter is, don't try to change your artists. I look at it that if you're signing an artist, you're signing them because and it's the concept of the partnership with the artist as well. You believe in what it is they're trying to do and they're trying to create. And beyond that, it's your job to help provide them with the tools and the support that they need to achieve that. But if you thought you were the artist or you had the answers or you knew what the song should sound like, then why don't you just sign yourself?
Go into the studio and do it.
So respect the artist's vision and integrity. Always give them, sometimes the artist doesn't have that knowledge of the industry or the business or the way it works. So give them the benefit of your knowledge and experience and your opinion on why this decision is a bad decision, even though you understand where they're coming from an artistic standpoint, but then let them make their own decision on whether or not they want to do it anyway. You got to bring them the knowledge of, here are the pros and the cons, and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and if it really makes sense. But beyond that, let them make their decisions and be transparent and honest. And I think karma, man, never be afraid to leave a little bit of money on the table, because.
No greed.
People who feel that they got treated well in a relationship, especially in such a small circle like the music business, they'll come back and that'll breed other opportunities where even if you can, or even if you're arguably justified to take a bigger piece, leave a little bit less. Take a little bit less than you think maybe you're entitled to or justified to have. Because then people leave feeling good about it, and a lot of this it's a business of relationships. If you leave people feeling good about having worked with you, they'll work with you in the future, and they'll deliver more artists to you, and word of mouth, artists as well. You said, where do you find artists? A lot of artists we find it through other artists.
Yeah.